Today, I want to talk about how what you want isn't always what you need, and how when you focus on what you want over what you need consistently, this is where self-sabotage can be coming into play and how to fix it. Hello, welcome to this episode of Voice Notes from Samio. Today's episode is going to be split into two parts: relationship with self and relationship with others, because this topic can heavily pertain to both. And I got this idea this morning because I was not in the mood. I just woke up feeling a little bit meh. And I wrote in my little moleskin journal. I've got a nice fresh book. I'm only a few pages in. I just write what comes to the top of my head every morning. And the first thing I wrote was, what do I need from myself today? And I instantly got the answer. I wrote, I need myself to show up, come up with a good podcast idea and record it. And here we are. Sometimes it can be so simple to ask your subconscious a question. I always feel journaling it out really helps. And to be honest, when you do this sort of thing, you can really come up with a stream of consciousness and write a lot. But other times it can just be simple as giving you the straight facts in a sentence like I got today. The reality is what we need is usually what we actually want in the long term. It's just hidden behind the discomfort of actually having to do the thing. It's the idea of choosing long-term gain over short-term reward. So let's talk about the relationship with yourself. When it comes to the relationship that you have with yourself, it's important to build self-trust. I have been on such a mission with that over the past few years. In particular this year, I feel like I've got my foundations in place with my fitness. I'm on it with that. And more recently, as I've spoke about quite a bit, and as I'm showing up now to do this, it's my podcast. That is the thing that I am creating self-trust with, because I'm staying disciplined in this practice of showing up and doing this on a weekly basis. Because for me, this is something that I enjoy, and I know that the long-term reward and the joy that I get from it is fulfilling and it is worth it. But I'm not going to lie, sometimes in the moment, I am not in the mood. I will ultimately easily go into self-sabotage mode, thinking of all the reasons why I can't record today, why I'm not in the mood, why I don't have a good enough idea. And I have had to kick that mentality, quite frankly, up the butt, because in the past it has held me back on more than one occasion. And in any area of life, when you keep repeating certain behaviors or patterns that interfere with your own personal desires or long-term goals, that's when it's ultimately become a form of self-sabotage. So you counteract that by working on that relationship with yourself and building self-trust. And how do you build self-trust? You create discipline with yourself. Now, the word discipline, not gonna lie, I was someone for a long time, I used to just shy away from it because it sounded kind of bossy, okay? I didn't like the energy of it, and so I rejected it. And so I had to reframe it a little bit and think about what discipline meant for me, because as soon as I heard that word, I immediately thought rules and authority and being stuck, all of the things that make me want to rebel, because it kind of makes me think of school. But when I reframed it to understand that discipline could ultimately create my own freedom and the things that I wanted for myself, it started to make me think, okay, I can create my own rules, my own framework for what this discipline needs to look like for me. And when you create that self-discipline, it allows you to show up even when you don't feel like it. I did a whole episode on this, so you can go check out that episode after this one if you would like. But building that self-discipline to show up even when you don't feel like it ultimately comes back to your why, thinking of the reason why you want this long-term goal, this pursuit, this life that you're aiming to live. And that will help bring you back on track to doing the thing you need to do over what you want to do in the moment. A perfect example would be studying. This is probably a bad example actually, because I was not the best at studying when I was in university, but let's use studying. Maybe if I knew then what I knew now, things would be very different. But studying, if you're studying for something and it's important for you and you're working towards something that you ultimately know will better your life or your career or whatever it is you're working towards, but in that moment you want to do anything but study, I feel you, we can be rebellious creatures, right? This is when it's important for you to go back and remember your why. What are you aiming towards? Because the short-term reward of abandoning the study, watching TV, doing whatever else it is you could be doing, over getting your head down, doing the studying, to ultimately get the grades or whatever it is, or to pass the test that you need to pass to get to where you want to be, is going to be so much worth it in the long term. And often we can self-sabotage because we don't like the feeling of discomfort. We want to feel safe. We want to feel comfortable. I've said this before and I'll say it again, but we have to be really aware of when we're in that headspace, because sometimes the thing that we need to do is going to be uncomfortable. It's not going to feel safe. It might feel a little bit strange. It might not always feel nice. I'm going to be so for real right now. I love doing this podcast. I love chatting your ear off, as I always say. However, does it always feel easy? Does it always feel like the most easeful choice I can make in the moment? No. And it doesn't always feel like the most comfortable choice. I wouldn't say it's uncomfortable, but is sitting on my living room floor right now as comfortable as sitting on my sofa and watching a TV show? No, of course it isn't. But do I find this one ultimately more rewarding in the long term? Absolutely. And I'm not saying always choose one over the other. There is a time and a place, and it's important to create that balance with it. But this is where the discipline comes into play and the rules that you have set around what you're ultimately trying to pursue, because it's really important that you have that framework in place so that you know when you ultimately need to do the thing and when you can stop. For me, this podcast, I'm going to be doing an episode a week. I'm not going to push myself beyond that just because I've recorded an episode. I'm not going to be like, oh, well, now I can do another one and I'll put out 3 a week, because that is what ultimately would lead to burnout. I've set my framework. I've set my tasks. I know what I need to do to show up. And once I've done that thing, then I can go sit on my sofa and chill, but not before I've done the thing that I need to do. And then I can go do what I want to do in the moment. And that's another important point. Short-term pleasure can often be disguised as self-care, but sometimes it's actually self-abandonment. Now, I am a self-professed self-care girly. I am all for taking a break when you need it, treating yourself with kindness, going slow when you need, being restful, being mindful, all of this. However, there does need to be a level of discernment when you are actually getting in your own way, as opposed to just letting yourself have a break. Because like I say, to move forward and move through or towards the thing that we want, it's 9 times out of 10 going to feel uncomfortable, because we need to build up resilience towards doing the thing that we're not used to doing. Otherwise, we'll just stay stuck in the same behaviors and patterns and ways of being that have felt safe and comfortable for the longest time. But safe and comfortable isn't always good, and it isn't always what we need to get to where we go. So sometimes in indulging in those short-term pleasures, if we're doing it a lot over time, it can compound, and we can ultimately be abandoning what we really want ourselves, whether it's in fitness, whether it's in health, whether it's in career, whether it's just showing up in relationships. There can be so many areas of life that this can creep into. And so I think it's really important to be real with yourself and ask yourself, if I keep repeating this behavior, or if I keep avoiding this thing to do something else that's maybe disguised as self-care or relaxation or whatever it may be in the moment, is it actually going to be beneficial in the long run or not? And I'm not talking about taking a break when you need to take a break. I'm talking about the perpetual, let's say, procrastination that gets in the way, that ultimately is avoiding the discomfort of moving forward and doing the thing that we need to do. Because that's the thing, when you keep showing up for yourself, you not only build consistency and self-trust, you also build up resilience, and you'll find that over time, doing that thing that you need to do becomes easier. There might be initial resistance, like I said, with me showing up and getting into flow to record an episode when I'm not feeling in the mood. There can be some initial resistance to start, but once I get into the flow, like now, there is no stopping me. I'm like give me the next episode. I'm ready to chat. And it gets a lot easier. Of course, a perfect example of this would be with working out. It wouldn't be a voice notes from Samio episode without mentioning exercise. But I think it's just a perfect point to illustrate this one. When you start exercise, you're pushing yourself out your comfort zone. You oftentimes maybe don't know what you're doing. It feels so uncomfortable. It can sometimes feel painful. I was having this conversation with a friend the other day who started running, and I was laughing and saying, you know, that feeling when you first run and you run outside and your lungs feel like they're gonna explode. Yep, everyone experiences it, but over time that goes away. And whilst the initial resistance to sometimes run can still be there, you build up that resilience and you don't get that feeling in your lungs anymore because you can do it and you've got the stamina, and so on and so forth. There's so many exercise analogies I could give, but when you build up that resilience, that in itself helps with the self-discipline, and it kind of goes in a cycle. And before you know it, you just keep doing the thing because it's become a part of your routine. When you start showing up the way you need over the way you want, you actually start to train yourself to appreciate the power of delayed gratification. There's so much instant gratification in our world right now. I'm not going to go into our phones and all of that because I've mentioned it in every episode. But you know, it's just easy to just get a quick dopamine fix and procrastinate and avoid the thing we actually need to do. But when we do get into the habit of appreciating that delayed gratification, it does get a lot easier. And actually the reward that we can get from doing the thing that we needed to do can be so much greater. I always know when I finish an episode, I feel so good because I've done the thing that I needed to do, that I ultimately wanted to do in the long term, and I've created the thing that I want to put out into the world. And it's not always easy, especially if you're aiming towards a bigger goal where the gratification might come in quite a long time. And that's why I always say it's important to celebrate the journey. I have goals for this podcast. I might not be where I want to be with them right now, but that's why I just celebrate the wins of simply having an upload. That feels really, really good for me. But on top of this, you can also give yourself the things that you want along the way, and it is important to do so as well. It's not all about just discipline and focusing on the long-term goal. We do need some joy in the moment, of course. So the way I like to do it is I just like to flip it. I do what I need to do first, and then I can do what I want. For example, I love to sit on the sofa and chill with my snacks and watch a really good TV series. I'm currently watching The Jackal, The Day of the Jackal. It is The Day of the Jackal, isn't it? The Day, don't even know the name of the show, but it's so, so good. No spoilers, please. I'm really enjoying that series at the moment. Even as I talk about it now, I'm like, oh, I cannot wait to get on that sofa and watch that show. But if I just gave into that want of just sitting and watching shows all day, aside from the fact that for me personally, I'd probably get pretty bored and a bit agitated, I would also not get anything done. And so for me, it works like a bit of a reward. I can have that thing, I can have that comfort after I've done the thing that I need to do first. And actually, it makes the joy of watching the show so much more because I'm able to sit in the satisfaction of knowing that I've done the thing that I needed to do. And now I'm enjoying the thing that I was really looking forward to, that I wanted to do, but I delayed that gratification and I looked forward to it and I got to have my need and then my want. And you can do this for so many areas of your life, switching around the want for the need. So doing what you need to do first and then allowing yourself to have what you want afterwards, because it's all about balance. It's not meant to be so restrictive that you can never have the thing you want. Of course, you can have the thing you want. It just needs to be in moderation so that you're not self-sabotaging yourself or holding yourself back. And having that balance is important so you don't just get stuck in grind mode. For example, if you're working towards a certain goal or you're working on a business or you're studying, you don't want to just become a workaholic that only allows themselves to focus on that thing. You need to give yourselves your wants occasionally, whether it's going out and seeing friends, having fun, just giving yourself time to do nothing. It's really important that you have both sides of the coin, but sometimes it's just a case of flipping the two so that you get your need done first and then you can have the want afterwards. So how to help in the moment when you're trying to focus on what you need over what you want. A good way to do this is to visualize your future self and ask, what would they thank you for today? And if you're someone who is quite a visual person, this can be a really good way to do it. But you can also try my journaling method, which is my personal favorite. I ask my subconscious a question and I just let it flow. And like I say, you sometimes just get a sentence back. So just to reiterate, what I wrote this morning was, what do I need today? Operative word being the need. And I instantly gave myself the answer. Sometimes when you do this, you might flow a little bit more might come out, stuff that you might not even realize. And the reason it's good to do it as either a visualization or to write it, as opposed to just kind of like sit there and think in your head, is because sometimes that other voice, the voice that isn't necessarily us, it can be the self-sabotage voice, can pipe up and tell us what we want over what we need. And so by doing a visualization or by writing it down, we can quieten that voice a little bit and tap into our subconscious. We can then just allow the subconscious to respond and figure out what we actually need. Now I am going to move on to relationships. In hindsight, this could have been a completely different episode. But we're rolling with it. Let's get into it. We've all likely been in a situation at some point, be it with a friend, a partner, even a family member, where we've stuck in scenarios that maybe aren't great for us, but we've stuck around or stayed in that relationship because we think we need that person in our life. But it's important to discern when a need is actually a want and when that want is actually serving us or not. And when you keep going back to certain people or situations that aren't necessarily good for you, it can sometimes be because you're actually getting something out of it without realizing. Now, we can get quite attached to different identities and we can have a lot of programming and a lot of wiring that makes us relate to people in certain ways. A big thing that comes to mind is when you are in the habit of people pleasing, you can often end up putting other people's needs above your own. And sometimes even in scenarios where people are treating us badly, if there is something programmed there from an early age, or even if it shows up as a way that we're used to being treated, this can sometimes give us a sense of familiarity. And you may even be drawn to someone who mirrors familiar but unhealthy patterns, like a partner who's emotionally unavailable. And that attraction might feel intense, but it doesn't mean it's healthy or fulfilling long term. And again, going back to that much earlier point about comfort and sticking to what feels comfortable to us. Like I said, comfortable doesn't always necessarily mean good. And so we can get in cycles that feel familiar and stay in relationships and situations that feel familiar just because it feels easier than the discomfort of seeking something different or looking outside of that. And so sometimes we can still be getting something out of these relationships that aren't good for us, because they could even just give us a sense of comfort, even if that comfort isn't ultimately good for us. And on the people-pleasing thing, don't let wanting to be liked make you overlook needing to be respected, because sometimes we can feel like we're having our needs met because it's the initial wants and desires that we have. But over a longer period, we can feel a level of discontent and dissatisfaction with a relationship because actually on a deeper level, our needs aren't actually being met. And if you are stuck in people pleaser mode with a particular person or people, it can become a form of self-neglect because you're putting someone else's needs above your own, or what you think their needs are above your own. And this can be quite insidious, and you might not even realize it until you reflect and over time and realizing that you need more for yourself because you've been giving so much to others. And another thing with relationships, you need to be careful and aware that you're not getting sucked into drama triangles. That's when there's a persecutor, a victim, and a savior or a hero. You can look it up online. It's very interesting, but it's ultimately where you get into situations where you're playing particular roles in certain relationships. And this becomes unhealthy when you are constantly playing the same role. Now, you might be playing a different role in different relationships, relationships. For example, I have played the hero or the rescuer. And what that can look like is, from your side, you can think it's healthy because you can feel like, oh, I'm just helping this friend, I'm just giving them a hand. But what this can look like over time is you constantly trying to be the one to help them, to ultimately save them, to be the hero, if you like. But this ultimately isn't helping the quote unquote victim, because it's keeping them in victim mode and it's not enabling them to take the action for themselves or ultimately save themselves. And obviously this can look quite different in different scenarios, and you might find yourself as the savior in one relationship but the victim or the persecutor in another. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of the drama triangle in depth. Definitely go check it out online if you are interested, because it can be a really good way to notice unhealthy patterns that may be taking place in some of your relationships. But being really aware of it is important, because if you keep perpetuating that same role, it can do everybody involved a disservice, not just for you, but whatever role that other person is playing in this triangle, it's also doing them a disservice too. And oftentimes all parties involved are at fault because you're all playing a part in your particular roles that help perpetuate the cycle. But in this, you can be taken away from your own needs so much, because whilst you're trying to fulfill a particular need for the other person, say for example, you're always in victim mode, and you're always going to the same friend for help, or they're rescuing you. In that scenario, you may be getting what you want. It can be very comforting when someone is there to help you out, when someone is there to quote unquote save you. But if that is constantly the narrative over time in a relationship, then you're ultimately not fulfilling your own needs, because you're not showing up for yourself in the way in which you need to. And in turn, you're also just doing the other person a disservice, because they're perpetually showing up for you and not necessarily getting their needs met, and vice versa. Because like I say, in these scenarios, it takes 2 to tango, or 3 to tango, or sometimes more, and each person plays a role. But it's really important to realize which role you are playing, if you are playing one of these roles, and setting boundaries in place or distancing yourself from said person if it's not possible to change the dynamics, in order to focus on what you ultimately need and not what you think you want. And I think overall relationships are really important to think about, because I could have just focused on the first part, which is focusing on relationship with self, but our relationships and people we are around and spend time with have such an influence on that and such an impact on that and how we treat ourselves and how we show up for others, that I think it's always important to look at the two and think about what areas and where and how we are giving ourselves just what we want or what we think we want, and not necessarily what we actually need, because this is what will enable us to become unstuck and move forward and get to where we want to be and have the types of relationships we want to have. I will say, I do think the relationship side of this is a little bit trickier, because it involves other people and moving parts and more than just your own thoughts, feelings, emotions. Whilst I do ultimately think you have to do what's right for you, I do know when it comes to behavioral patterns and situations involving other people, it can be a little bit harder to untether ourselves from or adapt, especially if that other person isn't adapting with you, and then you maybe need to move on. It can be a little trickier because, you know, that there's a lot going on. Emotions run deep and we feel all of the things, but hopefully it can just give you some food for thought if it is an area of your life that you need to look at. And I also want to add that, of course, with all relationships, they're going to ebb and flow. It's not always a 50-50. Sometimes you can give 90% and the other person in the relationship can give 10, and sometimes it's 40-60. But I think as long as that wave is kind of constantly ebbing and seesawing, and I'm talking all types of relationships here, as long as there is some ebb and flow over time and ultimately it is a relationship that you do find fulfilling, then that's perfectly fine. So in a relationship where you're maybe questioning if it's a want or a need in your life, I think a good question to ask yourself is simply, is this relationship serving me, and is it actually serving my future self? And I think it's important to ask both questions, because again, like I say, there's an ebb and there's a flow. And on top of that, if you just ask yourself the question of, is this relationship serving me? I think when there's a lot of emotions tied in and you are used to a certain person in your life and there's a lot of comfort you maybe get from a particular person, it's easy to just say yes in the moment, because sometimes we can put a lot on potential and what we hope for. But when we also pair that with the question of, is this relationship serving my future self? That also allows you to kind of reflect and look forward and think, okay, if these certain behavioral patterns, both from myself and the other party involved, continue, is this gonna add to my life, my evolution, where I want to be, where I want my relationship to be in a year, 2 years, 5 years, and so on. And so again, going back to the visualization or the journaling can be a really, really good way to do it, and check in with yourself and really think about how it feels and what you actually need as opposed to what you think you want. That's all I've got for you today. I really enjoyed this episode. I hope you've got something out of it. And I actually want you to do something this week before a big decision or an impulse. I want you to pause and ask yourself, is this something I want or is this something I need? And just see how it lands and see if it helps with those moments of impulsivity. I'm going to be trying it too, along with the journal prompt, and hopefully it can help us both focus on more of what we need over what we want. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave it a 5-star rating and review. It helps more than you know. Subscribe wherever you are watching or listening. I have thoroughly enjoyed chatting your ear off as always. I will speak to you next time.